Welcome, everyone, to the Duke Program in American Grand Strategies conversation with Jean Lee. I'm Rebecca Dudley. I'm one of the graduate fellows for the AGS program. I'm really excited to moderate this discussion today. We'll have about 45 minutes or so of a moderated discussion, and then we'll open up to Q&A from the audience. So to introduce our distinguished guest, we're very excited to have her. Jean Lee is a veteran foreign correspondent and expert on North Korea. She led the Associated Press news agency's coverage for the Korean Peninsula as bureau chief from 2008 to 2013. In 2011, she was the first American reporter who was granted extensive access on the ground in North Korea. And in January 2012, she opened Associated Press's Pyongyang bureau, the only U.S. text or photo news bureau based in the North Korean capital. She's made dozens of extended reporting trips to North Korea, visiting farms, factories, schools, military academies, and homes in the course of her exclusive reporting across the country. She was formerly the program director of Wilson Center's Korea Center. She appears as an analyst for CNN, BBC, NPR, PRI, and other media, and serves frequently as a speaker on Korea-related topics. And she is the co-host of the Lazarus Heist podcast on the BBC World Service, which was noted as one of the best podcasts of 2021 by several different outlets. So we are so excited to have her. Please join me in welcoming Jean Lee here to Duke.
Thanks for coming out on such a gorgeous, warm day. I hear it's been really cold here. It's still freezing up in Washington, D.C. Okay, so how are we going to do this? Let me test this out. Is it the middle one?
It's the side to
The side of this one? Okay. So I think we'll start. We're going to kind of do this as a moderated discussion. But what I'm hoping to do is to take you into North Korea, because it is a place that none of us can get into right now. No one's big, I should say, no foreigners really have been in for a couple of years. They sealed the border at the start of the pandemic. So it's been almost 2 years, very few diplomats, aid workers, no journalists. And so what I'm hoping to do is kind of take you into North Korea tonight, help to give you a little bit of background and context, because actually we're hearing so much about North Korea right now, right? You've heard there's been this barrage of missile tests in January. There's 7 launches in January alone. So I'm hoping that some of this will give you the background and the context that will help you understand what's happening with North Korea. I'm just going to mention that I have been sick with long COVID. I had COVID a couple of years ago, very early on in the pandemic. So bear with me. I can struggle sometimes to put a sentence together. So we're going to do this back and forth. You're going to save me for those moments when I can't get the words out, right?
Of course.
So I want to start by telling you that today is actually one of the biggest holidays in North Korea. It's Day of the Shining Star. And that dude up there, it's his birthday. It would have been his 80th birthday if he had stayed. So he passed away in 2011. That's, you guys know who that is? It's Kim Jong-il. And this, what I'm going to do is show you a mix of photos inside North Korea. As you see, the ones that have my name on them are pictures that I took while I was there. Huge holiday. It's a great coincidence. So it's called Day of the Shining Star because, according to the lore, and the Kim family mythology is fascinating. He was born in Mount Pektu, and I'm going to show you. I think I have a picture of. Oh, here we are. This is actually where his father was born. I was looking for one of my North Korean calendars. I have a ton of them, but I think I left them in storage, or they're in my office at the Wilson Center, which I haven't been back to in a couple of years. We call these red letter days. The birthdays of the Kims are the biggest holidays of the year in North Korea. So whenever you get a calendar in North Korea, you quickly check to see which days are red, so that those are the national holidays. I mean, you guys may not do this, but I do this where I immediately look to see what my days off are. What are the federal holidays? How do I build my... The North Koreans do that too. But for them, it's the leaders' birthdays that are the big holidays. Their Christmas, their Thanksgiving. So here, this is April. We're going to come back to this later. Today is a red letter day in North Korea. Now, so the story goes that on this day, 80 years ago, a shining star appeared in the mountains above that little cabin. And that was to announce that an heir had been born, Kim Jong-il. I mean, it's a total crock of you know what, because according to Soviet records, he was born an entirely different year in Siberia. But this is the lore. And what's so interesting is if you open up a North Korean textbook, it will start with a line. Kim Jong-il was born, I don't know the exact line, but off the top of my head, Kim Jong-il was born in Mount Paektu on February 16, 1942. Now we'll talk a little bit about the importance of numerology when we talk about the other kings as well. So this is a picture that I took. I went up to Mount Paektu. So this is a sacred mountain in the very far north of North Korea, where I'm telling you it is snowing 9 months out of the year. But it does make for some pretty dramatic photos. If you look closely at the picture on top, can you guys see it? The name in red? Kim Jong-il's name is carved in red on that mountain. So you see that all over the mountains in North Korea. These red sayings and their names carved into the sides of mountains. And then this cabin is where they say those three pictures are Kim Il-sung, who was the founder of North Korea, his father, Kim Jong-il in the middle, and then his mother, Kim Jong-suk. So if you look, the cabin is suspiciously clean. Doesn't look like it's actually there during the era, but it's kind of a pilgrimage site for North Koreans in the fun. Jump in anytime you want if you have any questions. Okay. So today's a big holiday. This is an example of the kind of military parade you might go to if you're a member of the elite. So this is the kind of thing that I had access to as a reporter who was accredited to work in North Korea. If you look closely, you'll see Kim Jong-un. I wasn't using a zoom camera with a zoom lens, so this is close. This is about as close as I was able to get. Freezing cold. One thing about North Korean people ask me what it's like. I always say it's cold. Paige, you probably heard me say this numerous times because that's something that you can't sense when you're looking at the photos. But trust me, if you're there today, that's all you can think about. There's no heat anywhere. I mean, I think I spent, oh my gosh, if I was inside a building like this, all I would be doing is walking around looking for that tiny bit of heat because it's just, you cannot imagine how cold it is. And then there's no heat whatsoever. So it's usually even colder inside buildings than it would be outside where you have a little sun. So I was telling the story to anyone who met me earlier today about this is the day when I thought I was going to die because I think I almost froze to death on the day. But this is what we did not see this type of a military parade today in North Korea. And I don't have the pictures of all the weapons that were displayed. But this is what you might see if you were a member of the elite on one of those days when they have a military parade. But this is what you wake up and do if you're North Korean on this holiday. The first thing you want to do is go pay your respects at the bronze statues of the leaders. So this is on Mansu Hill. This is Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il. And most of the North Koreans that I spoke to, they were like, let's get that out of the way. It's a holiday, right? So let's go put our flowers down and bow at the statues so we can enjoy the rest of the day off. But for me, it was always such a great chance to see North Koreans. One of the things the North Koreans like to do is keep foreigners apart from the locals. And so they make a lot of effort to keep us separate. And so you do try to find those occasions where you can kind of mix and mingle with them. And going to the statues on a day like this is always one of those opportunities. So these are soldiers who bowed and turned around and are going to do kind of hopefully get a drink. And flower shows. This is actually one from an April flower show, but just to give you a sense of how important the rockets are. Because this is going to be part of the context that I want to provide for you. So pay attention to that. We included a huge source of pride for the North Koreans. And so you will often see children standing really stiffly, like, they're getting this really important shot. I also just love that they're always they don't quite take selfies. I haven't seen people taking selfies, but they do take a lot of photos. Again, this is for the Day of the Shining Star, which is today, just to give you a little bit of a look. So the red flower, beautiful begonia, it's called the Kim Jong-ilia. So this is a begonia that was cultivated and presented by the Indonesians to Kim Jong-il. His father has a flower called the Kim Il-sung. And I don't think that Kim Jong-un has a flower yet. We'll see who forward with a flower for Kim Jong-un. But again, you'll see here, sorry, my mask keeps slipping down. the importance of the rocket, the importance of weapons. And so I think that for me, sometimes going to these flower shows is helpful to see what it is they're trying to promote and the sense of pride that they're trying to promote among the people. And they really do have a sense of pride. I think with the North Koreans, the feeling is we're such a tiny country. They recognize that they don't have that much, and yet we're able to make these weapons on our own. Whether they're making them on their own is another question. But there is a strong sense of pride, and you see the rockets everywhere. From, I bought some notebooks. They're on the cover of notebooks. You go to playgrounds, you have rocket. I was trying to think, do we have rockets in our playgrounds? We might, but not to the extent I think that they are celebrated in North Korea. Are you guys hearing me okay? Okay, so this is another thing you might do today if you're a member of the elite in Pyongyang, which is going to a synchronized swimming performance, and I'm pretty sure they had them this year as well. There's nobody like the North Koreans to do synchronized anything. They love synchronized, whether it's the mass games, and I don't have a picture of that, but I'm sure you've all seen it, like 150,000 kids performing en masse. So love the synchronized swimming performances because they're very uniquely, I think getting whatever it is, 60 swimmers together to perform together is something that they cherish, right? For us, it's much more about individuality. For them, it's about being able to do everything in total unity. Ice skating. This is another thing that they do. Now, they're not at the Olympics right now in Beijing. They were banned from the Olympics. And Kim Jong-un did announce that he wasn't going to send any athletes to the Olympics, which is, I think, disappointing for those of us who are hoping that it might be an opportunity for diplomacy. The Olympics have served as an opportunity for diplomacy with North Korea in the past. Actually, one of my first assignments as a reporter was to cover the Sydney Olympics, which was in 2000, which tells you how old I am. But one of my first foreign assignments. And that occasion, I was sent to cover the North Koreans and the South Koreans walking into the stadium together as a joint team. And it still gives me the chills to think about it, to remember it, being in the stadium in Sydney and seeing them walking together under a unified flag. Just never thought that would happen. Now that was 22 years ago. A lot has happened since then. I don't think we're as starry-eyed about the idea of unification as we were even 22 years ago. But absolutely amazing to see North Korean athletes and South Korean athletes side by side. And then again, 4 years ago at the Pyeongchang Olympics, we saw the Koreans field a joint women's hockey team. Hugely controversial, because I'm not sure that everybody was happy. The women themselves didn't really have much of a choice. It was just decided by the Koreans that their team would be a joint hockey team. I wish I had a picture. I did attend some of the games. But this was an amazing team because it was South Korean players, North Korean players, and then because the South Korean team wanted to boost their level of play, they recruited Korean-born American and Canadian players, some of whom, many of them didn't speak common language. Some of them were adoptees, some of them were second generation, like me, Korean Americans. So you had essentially Korean women from 4 different countries competing on the same team for Korea. So just a really interesting experience, and I'm hoping to talk a little bit more about this in the next season of my podcast, because I think it's a really interesting example of diplomacy. And it was at the Olympics as well, after months of provocations from North Korea, that the president of South Korea and Kim Jong-un used it as an opportunity for diplomacy. And Kim Jong-un actually sent his sister to the Pyeongchang Olympics. It's kind of mind-boggling to think about, but we had Kim Jong-un's sister in Pyeongchang for the Winter Olympics 4 years ago. So there is another meaning for Shining Star, the holiday that we're celebrating today. I mean, I don't know if you guys are celebrating it, but so Shining Star, there are other words for it. Sometimes it's lodestar, so sometimes you'll hear Kim Jong-il referred to as the lone star or bright star. It's also the name of that launched into space around this time, a couple of years ago. I think it was 2016. And so they would call it a gift, a birthday gift to Kim Jong-il to send the satellite into space. Now, when you send a satellite into space, you're using rockets. And there are many countries, including the United States, that believe that this is a covert test of ballistic missile technology. Now, North Korea is banned by the UN Security Council from any ballistic missile activity, any nuclear activity. And so they'll claim this as part of their sovereign right to develop space exploration, or to explore space, by sending this gift, which they call the shining star, into space. But many people are skeptical and see it as an opportunity to test that ballistic missile technology. Now, I don't think they're even pretending. The North Koreans aren't even pretending that it's a gift to the late leader. But that's another use of this name. So sometimes when you look at some of these code words like shining star, it's interesting to make the connections and to see how what's the word, the symbolism carries into things like the missile. And so it's fascinating for me to kind of pick up on these patterns. Did you want to jump in?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you had mentioned, as we started this, the recent spate of missile testing by North Korea this last fall and then last month as well. To what extent do you think, or would you say this, particularly the January missile test, kind of tie into, getting ready maybe for the celebration today, or that sense of kind of pride in the missile program that you were talking about? Because as you mentioned, they're banned from testing, but that hasn't stopped them.
That's absolutely right. People keep asking why now. They've been quiet for the last couple of years. Why now? And I also have to point out this is a huge year for North Korea. So this is the 10th year of Kim Jong-un's rule. Today would have been the 80th birthday of Kim Jong-il's birth anniversary, as they call it. And then I think, let's see where I go with. Okay, I think in a couple slides, I'll show you that we have another red letter day coming up. You saw it in that calendar, April 15th. And that would have been, that's the 110th anniversary of Kim Il-sung's birth. And that, of course, any of these, we call them like letter 10th, the 20th, the 5th, the 15th, huge milestone anniversaries. These are always opportunities for North Korea to celebrate. Now, these are important because so much of Kim Jong-un's legacy is tied to his belief that the Kim family needs to rule North Korea in order for North Korea to maintain its way of life. So he's written it into their version of the Constitution that a member of this Paektu bloodline. So I mentioned Paektu, which is that mountain in the far north. And as I said to you earlier, it's really disputed whether Kim Jong-il was born there. But the reason why this mythology is so interesting is that Paektu is the mountain where the Koreans believe the first ruler of Korea, the creator of Korea, descended from this fall. So what that tells you is that they want to create this mythology that the Kims have a divine right to rule. That they are almost, and they actually use language like heaven sent, there's so much Christian language in the cult of personality wrapped around the Kim family. It's a really interesting course of study. And that's partly because, some came from a Christian family. So I'm digressing a bit, but I think this is a fascinating piece of American history in North Korea. Pyongyang used to be called the Jerusalem of the East because we had all these American missionaries who settled in Pyongyang and were converting North Koreans or Koreans at the time to Christianity, including Kim Il-sung's family. And so there's an interesting tradition of Christianity in North Korea, and he took from that part of his heritage, as well as many other forms, Confucianism, obviously Stalinism, Marxism, and Leninism, to create this really unique cult of personality that is very specific to the North Koreans. And so I think for Kim Jong-un to be it's hard enough for the son, Kim Jong-il, to inherit leadership of a poor country. Can you imagine how much harder it is to extend that into a third generation? And so much of what Kim Jong-un has done is really try to establish that he has the right to inherit this leadership and that he has the vision to carry North Korea into the future. He's a young guy. He's a millennial. He's, okay, we're going to talk about his age. We know that his birthday is January 8th. He's a Capricorn like me. We don't know exactly what year, because now that I've told you a little bit about the years, what do you think is, well, okay, you guys are probably better at math than I am, but we suspect that he was born in 1984, but it's quite possible when the official mythology comes out that his birthday will be changed to 1982. I'm just guessing, but I think that's what they did with Kim Jong-il, and because the grandfather was born in 1912, and there's this sense of continuity, right? So then you have all these major anniversaries in the same kind of year. So I'm just going to put it out there. I think that's what's going to happen. But because numerology, when you're in North Korea, is so important. Anywhere you go, they will talk about the numbers. They will talk about the symmetry of numbers. And so the numerology is so much a part of this mythology. So where was I? Talking about Kim Jong-un, and we were talking about the missiles. Okay, so let's keep going. This is just to provide that context again, which is that we have this happening right now. And I absolutely agree that part of what this is in the short term, to have a new weapon to unveil for the North Koreans, to have a sense of pride around. And I know that, okay, here's that red letter. Here's the close-up of the red letter day calendar. Because this is coming up, right? April 15th. This is a picture from Kim Il-sung's birthday, 110th anniversary, day of the sun. Another interesting motif, right? He's like the sun. Let me just go back. One of the things that the North Koreans do, though, in order to justify spending so much money on weapons when they have so little, is to raise a sense of fear and it's actually a very useful trick that leaders utilize. If you create a sense of war or fear of attack together, it does create a sense of nationalism. I'm kind of thinking, for example, I know you guys are too young, but after 9/11, I was in New York City on that day, and I never, if New York City above nationalism is very international, but I've never seen so many American flags as after 9/11. So I do think there's something about attack or the fear of attack that brings out a sense of patriotism, and the Kims know that. And so they do try to create a sense of fear in order to bring the people together, especially during hard times. And I would say that North Korea is going through a very hard time. The border's been closed for 2 years. That means it's not just people who aren't going through. There are no goods going through. There's no medicine coming in, no humanitarian aid, no fuel. And I shouldn't say no, because they're certainly finding ways to get around it. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But he needs something to bring the people together. And so there's this interesting dynamic of trying to provoke, to bring a sense of raised tensions in the region, to try to solicit a kind of back and forth. We saw this happen in 2017 with President Trump. And that justifies the spending of all this money on nuclear weapons at a time when they don't have those resources. So it's an interesting cycle of violence that's worked really well for the kids. This time of year can also be, it can be a very provocative time. We had, as I showed you, the missile launch to send that birthday gift of a satellite into space. That year, in 2017, we also had the assassination of Kim Jong-un's half-brother. Do you guys remember this in Malaysia with a nerve agent? And as soon as that happened, I thought, oh crap, that was another birthday gift to the leader. And so this is my Esquire magazine piece to try to explain the history of assassinations as birthday gifts to the leader. The most gruesome type of birthday gift, but certainly a gift that could give you wounds and brownie system. This is what we talked about. I do think that we will see some pretty new weapons unveiled during the April parade. April is a time when Pyongyang looks its best. It's beautiful weather, spring, and that's a time when they want to open up to the world. So they do love to have foreign journalists come in and take pictures like this one, where they look like this really strong, powerful country. I don't think that they'll be letting journalists in this year because of COVID, but they will be promoting and pushing these images out on their state media. And the concern I have, of course, about that is that because they've closed off the borders, the North Koreans are controlling the narrative. When we don't have foreigners on the ground or Westerners on the ground, we don't have anybody who can really tell us what's happening outside of the theater of what we see at big military parades like this. And that does concern me because it makes it so much harder for us to really understand what's happening and how to resolve the conflict that we're in. It's so convenient, it's strategic on the part of the North Koreans in the sense that it's this fog of war that they're creating. It really obscures us from making the right decisions as well. So we're not sure, but we do know that they've been working on a hypersonic missile. They tested an intermediate range ballistic missile. So we'll see. We're not in North Korea. We've got satellites looking down on North Korea, seeing preparations for a parade, but possibly I think for April, as you mentioned. And I have to tell you, I have been, I don't know how many times where those guys are, and there's nothing like seeing an intercontinental ballistic missile coming at you at arm's length. Do is just terrified. They want me to be terrified and for me to tell you all how terrified we should be, right? It plays into the narrative and it's a fear that they're trying to create. A little later, the goal is to be in a stronger position before they go into any nuclear negotiations. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit about how these holidays are also, as we mentioned, about the Kim family legacy. So another thing that you'll do if you're in Pyongyang is go to a photo show, an exhibition, and you'll see pictures like this showing the Kim family chain of command. So on the left, you see a young Kim Jong-il with his father, and then on the right, a young Kim Jong-un with his father. So creating that sense of continuity of leadership, of the two young Kims following in their father's footsteps. Paige, I know you're going to want me to mention how freezing cold. So this is what you do as a reporter. You look at this and you think, why are they still? Because you can't see. There's no heat in this building. You've got to look for those other clues, but I can tell you it's freezing cold in there. So you never take your winter. I used to wear 7 layers of clothes and I never took them off. I went to bed in them. I would only take them off when I got to the Beijing airport and I was like, oh my God, I just start stripping down in the middle of the airport. Show you, these are pictures that I took at the photo exhibition. This is a young Kim Jong-il in front of a statue of his father. This is up in Sangjiang, which is the town that's the base for Mount Paektu, that mountain that I mentioned. This is a painting of him building his whole monument for his father. And this is a picture that was just posted on North Korean state media today. And it's a statue of Kim Jong-il that Kim Jong-un has built in that same area for his father. This is how they celebrated the holiday with fireworks. These are new houses that have been built. This is something that Kim Jong-un has been promoting, is how he's been building these homes. But I'd like to point out that the only construction we've seen so far are in those towns that are linked to the Kim family. So I always look, yes, it's great. I'm so happy that he's building homes outside of the capital city, which we call the showcase. They call it their Socialist fairyland. That's what they call Pyongyang. I call it the showcase capital. But any construction that's happening outside the city, the capital city, is in cities that are related to the Kim family. So again, an investment in the legacy of the Kim family. Everything is about elevating the Kim family and, as a result, legitimizing Kim Jong-un's right to rule. Yes, I think one thing we have to keep in mind, as I said, he's a millennial. He's still in his 30s. He's got a long ways to go. The first time I saw him, I just thought he still had baby fat on his cheeks, and I just thought, how is this kid gonna take over this country? And because he had been kept secret, that's the thing. There's, the North Koreans are super secret. He was completely kept secret until October 2010. Actually, I should say September 2010, when his name was published for the first time in state media. And then he took power a little more than a year later. So the North Koreans didn't really know him. So one of the strategies he's employed is to focus on loyalty among his generation. So focusing on kids. How are we doing on time?
We're good for that.
Okay. But, okay, I think, did you want to jump in on anything or before I move into some other pictures or?
No, you can keep going. I want to get to more about like cyber and stuff.
Okay. So I don't know what the transition here is, but I did want to show you what it looks like away from the propaganda. Once you get out of Pyongyang and you see what the rest of the country is like, because these are the kinds of pictures you don't see in their state media. Paige, did you want? Okay. And so I just have a couple pictures that show you what the countryside looks like. Have any of you been to South Korea? Yeah?
I'm South Korean.
Oh, you are? So does this look like South Korea? No. And so for me, it was really hard because I would leave Pyongyang, North Korea in the morning and be in South Korea by afternoon. And you see, if you're in South Korea, you see that there are the same mountain ranges. But you go from this kind of absolute devastation to South Korean mountains. And I think on my Instagram feed, I show a side-by-side picture, one taken in North Korea in the morning, and another taken in South Korea in the afternoon. And it's the mountains are just covered with trees. Korea is super mountainous. North Korea is 85% mountains, but they've chopped down all the trees to use them as firewood. So there's a huge environmental disaster happening in North Korea. And what happens, of course, when you chop down all the trees is that when you get these monsoon rains, they create massive landslides. And those massive landslides did trigger a famine in the 1990s. We're not at a famine stage as far as we know in North Korea, but there's certainly chronic hunger. And I think that a huge chunk of the North Koreans have trouble getting food on the table, and they don't have a well-rounded diet. One of the important things about the holidays like today is they get a gift basket. It's one of the few times, one of the 2 times out of the year, 3 times out of the year that they get a gift basket from the state. So we did see a cargo train go to China. It was the first time the North Koreans allowed anything to go in and out of North Korea. And I couldn't help but think, they're trying to get the gifts together to win the people's loyalty, to assure them they're still taking care of them. And so we should start to see reports of what was in those gift baskets. Nothing, might be apples if you're lucky, or a bottle of soju, or I have seen for the very, very lucky, there might be, I met one who said she received a set of Kim Il-sung's entire works. But, I think for South Koreans, anyone who knows South Korea, to see this, it's imaginable. And my mother, who was born in Korea, says this is what it looked like after the Korean War in 1953, after it had been bombed and completely destroyed during the war. And then she used to have to go out as a kid on Arbor Day to have to replant. So actually, it's interesting, Kim Jong-un, one of the first things he did when he became leader was try to come up with a reforestation plan. But for the most part, once you leave Pyongyang, okay. And again, not the pretty pictures that we see in the state propaganda, but this is what a smaller city looks like. And usually what I try to point out with this is that the windows are broken. So I told you how cold it is. I told you I almost froze to death. There's so many buildings that I've seen outside Pyongyang where they don't even have windows. And they don't have heat. A lot of times North Koreans told me that they have to burn charcoal briquettes in the middle of their apartment, which I think is incredibly dangerous. So really difficult in some of these smaller cities where they can't grow their own food. Whereas you can see, it's pretty sparse, pretty impoverished lifestyle. So this is what's happening while money's being poured into the nuclear program, ballistic missiles. in a city and a town, I should say. As I mentioned, when you have the landslides, this is a very fertile valley, actually one of the more lush valleys, but this is a village completely destroyed by those landslides from monsoon rains. A town that's just completely cut off. No food, no power, obviously. So I went in with the Red Cross. They had brought in tents for the people, some basic supplies so they could get by. But very difficult. Okay, so going back to wooing, we'll get to cyber. Going back to wooing the younger generation. This is actually me, a big snowboarder, as I mentioned to you. Tahoe was my home mountain. And so I did do, one of the things that Kim Jong-un did was build a ski resort. At the time, this was in 2014, and at the time I thought, oh, I think he's trying to prepare for the Pyeongchang Olympics. And there was a proposal to train some of the athletes or have some of the athletes compete in North Korea. It didn't happen, obviously. But this was an interesting experience for me. I don't recommend it. I will tell you that I think it's dangerous. It's a good thing we can't get in right now, but any kind of adventure sports in North Korea are absolutely dangerous. Please don't do it. Because if you get hurt, so I'm just telling you now, I did it, but do not do this at home. But for me, it was fascinating to, normally I am trying to avoid being grilled by the North Koreans, but this is a really fun time to be chased down the mountain by the North Koreans because they had never seen a snowboarder. So these are the kinds there is something to sports diplomacy. You can't really get people past the kind of political hurdles in their minds. And so that is one positive thing about sports diplomacy, but please do not go snowboarding in North Korea. And then again, I like to show this picture. This is the ice skating rink that Kim Jong-un built. I used to take my staff ice skating all the time. I'm from Minnesota, so this was what we used to do on days off. But I just love that the women use or I shouldn't say the women, but the North Koreans are just like us. They're like texting while they're. So this is really just to show another slice of daily life. You can see how stylish she is. You can see that they love technology and gadgets. And this is part of this effort to woo that generation. It's your generation. North Koreans are just as fascinated by electronics as we are. And once they get a taste of it, I think it makes them feel like they're part of the world. They do not have open access to the internet. You probably know that. It's very limited. We did see a lot of investment in the computers. Those little red marks show that they were a gift from Kim Jong-un. If you make a visit so I went in with Eric Schmidt, who is the chairman of Google, former chairman of Google. Is that picture? And they did turn the internet on for this visit. And I talk about it in the podcast, I think, or Jared Cohn, who was on the trip, talks about it in the podcast. And I do remember at the time that he Googled New York City. And so that's where I went. So, but it's not, so when you use the internet in North Korea, it's very heavily monitored. And so you were very careful, trust me, to make sure that every site you're visiting is legit. Just a little bit of propaganda. So a poster showing not only that connection between technology or computers and rockets. And so, okay, we'll start talking about. So I think that one of the things I saw unfold was this effort to portray Kim Jong-un as this, following his father and his grandfather's footsteps, right? They modeled him to look just like his grandfather. It's super eerie. It's like a carbon copy, but with slightly more modern clothes. Although I think the leather jacket, I don't know where that came from, because he often wears this long leather trench coat. But often, for me, with my books, I brought back a lot of books from North Korea. If you take a look at pictures of Kim Il-sung, you see that they copy them exactly with Kim Jong-un, but with a slightly more modern flair. So I always think about it, that he's portrayed as a replica of his grandfather, but a more modern millennial leader. And so, it does make me think, okay, what does that mean? How is he going to rule? At the very beginning, we did think, well, maybe, he's going to open up. Maybe he's going to be a little like his grandfather. But I actually think if you read my Esquire article, I actually think he's under, even if he wants that, and I do think he wants that, he's under enormous pressure, and he's not sure that that will work unless he's got more of a, he's cemented his legacy at home among the people and shown that he has the qualifications to lead. So I still feel like he was for many years still in the process of winning the people over, establishing his credentials, and then also carving a path for the future, which I think includes nuclear weapons. His treasured sword makes North Korea untouchable, and actually he's right. And he's got nuclear weapons. He's like, they're not going to attack us. But I do think that they will serve as more than just this treasured sword that will defend, or treasured shield, or treasured sword, but that it's something. The nuclear weapons are something that force countries like the United States to deal with North Korea, compels them to deal with North Korea. It will compel them to come to the negotiating table. Now, he tried that, as you might remember, with President Trump. Did not go the way he wanted. I really think he thought he was going to come home with a deal. He said, okay, so he took a train, 66-hour train to Vietnam in February 2019, so that's a couple of years ago. And I don't think he would have taken a train, and all that way for nothing. So I think that was a huge disappointment for Kim Jong-un. And so if I'm Kim Jong-un, I'm sitting in Pyongyang, I'm like, okay, I got to make these nuclear weapons work for me. He's going to want to expand that arsenal so that when he gets back to that negotiating table, he's going to be in a stronger position. And I think that's what we're seeing right now is in the short term, producing these weapons to parade in April. In the long term, making sure he's in a better position for that moment when he does sit down at the negotiating table again. So the big question often is, well, where are they getting the money? We've had UN Security Council resolution sanctions for years. That hasn't stopped it. The border's been closed for 2 years now. I've been watching Kim Jong-un invest in science and technology, wooing millennials with science and technology, investing in science and technology. And so, of course, I kept thinking, that's all great. Like, I would love to see North Korea modernize. I absolutely love getting my staff hooked on electronics, like my iPhone. But is there another nefarious side to all this investment in science and technology? And so this is what we investigate in the Lazarus heist. Really try to look at how that science and technology investment might be turning into an investment in cyber. Because if you think about it, cyber is a brilliant way to get around sanctions, right? It's so hard to trace cyber attacks. Who cares about border closures, right? Cyber exists in a space that isn't bound by borders. And what we discover, of course, and of course, through the podcast is the challenges that North Korea faces in, okay, two things. First of all, this country that I told you was completely disconnected in a certain sense, not connected to the internet. How are they creating some of the world's best hackers? So we explore that, how it is they're able to train the hackers, especially in social engineering, when they're not connected to the internet like we are. And so this is what we explore in the podcast. So much fun, but also just a way for me to really investigate those questions I had when I was in Pyongyang, seeing all this investment in science and technology.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to ask one more follow-up question about this, and then we can turn to a little bit of questions as well. I'd love to hear, in particular, you touched on this, but in particular, thinking about missile testing and evading the sanctions and the UN, and one kind of big piece that is at the center of this, U.S.-North Korea relationship is also the U.S.-China relationship, right? So the UN Security Council sanctions and the response recently to missile testing and other things in the Security Council has kind of has highlighted this U.S.-China dynamic. So I'd love to have you speak just a little bit about how the U.S. and China strategic relationship, strategic competition kind of pulls North Korea in, and in particular, the difference between the Trump administration and the Biden administration and how that all factors in.
Yeah, so I think what was interesting about the Trump administration is that President Trump, I think he thought North Korea would be an easy foreign policy victory. He's like, oh yeah, I'll just bully this little poor guy from a poor country into doing what I want, which is a nuclear deal. But Kim Jong-un turned out to be far harder to deal with, I think, than President Trump expected, because the stakes are so high for Kim Jong-un. He wasn't going to just give in that easily. So I think that they both kind of stood their ground. It was a difficult, but President Trump really created this bilateral relationship, right? It was a romance, really, but it was a US-North Korea negotiation that took precedence. What we're seeing now with the Biden administration is something different, which is weaving the issue into a broader Indo-Pacific or US-China strategic competition issue. And so by that, what I mean is it's not going to be all about just North Korea. North Korea is going to be a piece of a broader regional puzzle, which I think is frustrating for the Koreans, but makes sense in the sense that I personally believe that the best way to rein in North Korean belligerence, now I feel like I'm using a word. All the partners in the region to kind of stand united and to work to figure out what their common ground is and to kind of close the loopholes to prevent North Korea from driving a wedge between these allies. And that includes China. So I think the Biden administration has to find a way to get China on board with a kind of international response to North Korea. And that's what I see happening. I do think the US and China have to find areas where they can collaborate. And North Korea might be one of them. Same thing, I think, for there's a lot of tension between South Korea and Japan historically. And again, I think that North Korea could prove to be one of those areas of common ground where they both have an interest in collaborating, communicating, making sure that they're working at least in lockstep with the United States as a trilateral alliance to make sure that there's no room for North Korea to kind of drive a wedge. The North Koreans love to play a divide and conquer game. And so we will often see them trying to play the US and China off of one another. I don't think, somebody asked me this just today about the China relationship. It's not a cozy relationship, it's a complicated relationship. I think there's a lot of resentment on the North Korean side, how much they depend on China. And they will play China as much as they rely on them. And so that's something that's important for us to remember. Okay, I think you guys probably have some questions.
Absolutely, let's open it up. I think we have a mic here that we can bring to, yeah, and then we'll start here with Andrew.
Thank you, Ms. Lee, for this really interesting presentation, and you, Becca, for your excellent moderation. I would love to hear a little bit more, Ms. Lee, about how you did your job in North Korea, and specifically, how did you go about cultivating sources who perhaps live under constant surveillance and maybe even fear? And were you able to push past the party line in certain instances? And how did you deal with the potential moral concerns there? Should people be, or should they run into trouble for speaking with you?
Yeah, I have to say, I worked as a journalist on assignment in dozens of countries, and no place was as difficult as North Korea. It's just every aspect of reporting in North Korea is such a challenge. And when I hear my fellow reporters talk about reporting from other tough places, Soviet Union or Russia, Vietnam, Cuba, I'm like, that's nothing compared to North Korea. It's so restrictive. And that said, by opening, so this is a picture of my office in North Korea. Like every office, I have the portraits of the leaders on the wall. But unlike every other office, I furnished it with IKEA. So it became like the most exclusive lounge. Like I would come back and be lounging on my cheap IKEA sofa. But one of the reasons why it was so important to open the office in North Korea was so that you had a different level of access. So if you're a foreign correspondent who flies in, you're usually coming in for say we did have COVID, you'd be coming in for this parade today, you'd be there. You'd be there for 3 or 4 days on a completely orchestrated trip. They pick you up, take you to the hotel. You can't go anywhere without 2 minders watching everything you do. You know, I was joking earlier that you can't even go to the bathroom. That's kind of true. You really can't you can't go for a walk. This is if you're there as a foreign correspondent. By negotiating access and being there on the ground and having my own operation, I was operating under a different set of rules. And so I was able to walk around on my own in certain areas. I was able to take pictures. I had more permission to take pictures of almost anything I wanted, which is very unusual. Many journalists will tell you that they will. So I made the mistake. I don't know if I should be talking about these things, but I had permission to take certain pieces of equipment into certain places that the other foreign correspondents who came in under one of these government organized trips did not. And they were very quick to notice, why does Jimmy get to take a picture? And I did once make the mistake of taking a picture I got on one of the press buses and took a picture out the window. Huge no-no for most journalists, but I did it because I'm so used to it. And they stopped the bus and I thought, oh, that was me. And I told them immediately, I'm the one who took the picture, but I have permission. So they're very strict about who can do what. So what I do, that's why establishing an operation can be very helpful because you just operate under a different set of rules. Within that, you have to create ways to have candid conversations because it's not useful to me at all in some circumstances if every single interview is preordained. And so my team knew that I would not do an interview like that. I would only do interviews that I requested or that I could pick on my own. So they got used to that. Of course, there are times, so they knew that I wasn't going to do anything that they suggested, that it would always have to be of my own accord. In terms of sources, I mean, it's really difficult. I had certain ways that I would say, I don't know if I call them sources, but you do as a reporter want to have people that you can gossip. You can kind of, you can have candid conversations with. And for that, it was really important for me to learn the North Korean dialect. So I don't know, okay, so I know we have, do you speak North Korean also?
Is it the same language?
So it would be the difference. So for example, should I speak some North Korean to you? I would say that it's similar to the difference between British English and American English. Like, it's the same language. Or like when I went to New Zealand for the first time, when you have to ask them to repeat themselves 3 times and you're so embarrassed because you're like, okay, it's a similar kind of thing. It's a different dialect, but it's so different because we haven't been exposed to North Korean. So these are different vocabulary. I call it the revolutionary vocabulary. There's a lot of words we don't use. They use a little bit more of a traditional Korean, a formal Korean. And there are, so the South Korean language has evolved so much. It's got a lot of slang, a lot of influence from the West. And so it's all, they really are like different languages. And so one of the favorite things for my staff was to train me to speak like a North Korean. And I have to say my Korean started speaking like a North Korean in South Korea. It's really hard to keep it can be hard for me to keep the languages straight. So that's important because that means you can have conversations with people, even if they're small conversations that aren't, because once you bring a microphone or a camera or an interpreter into that conversation, it changes how they speak. And I think I told you this earlier today, where immediately you put a microphone in front of someone and they'll say, thanks to the dear comrade, our respected Marshal Kim Jong-un, propaganda. And so it's useless, it's useless for us in really trying to understand what they're thinking and what they want, how they live their daily lives. So for me, I would try to find ways for kind of very casual conversations to just get a feel of the, just get my sense of what people are thinking about, and they're really mundane things, often worries about their kids' education, how to study more and play, it's like very similar things to parents anywhere. And I think there's something important in that too, and remembering that they're very human as well. We did gossip a lot, and that was important because I was trying to figure out some things that I was seeing. And yeah, so in terms of sources though, it's really not like other countries where you can cultivate sources because they are so strict about keeping us apart from most North Koreans. I would say that with North Korea coverage, it's important to use all the tools at your disposal. That means talking to people in Seoul, in Beijing, in Washington, defectors, NGOs. You just need to talk to everyone. It is really a beat where you really have to develop sources everywhere and triangulate information. And the information you're going to get from North Korea you just have to that provides you with another layer. But just what you get in North Korea is just going to be propaganda. That said, everything that I felt and learned, has shaped my understanding of the place in a way that I wouldn't have had if I had so much time there. And so my instinct and my feeling is less based on my reporting than on living and working there and having daily, living there, going through shopping there and buying gas there and all those things that help you understand the place. That said, the question you say about the moral responsibility, absolutely. As a journalist, you have to protect your sources. People used to accuse me of pulling my punches, not being as critical as I could have been. I don't think they understand. I'm not going to put their lives at risk. And so this is something, it's no joke in North Korea. I mean, it's not a joke. You've seen the reports about executions. You've seen the reports about the prison camps. These are very real. And so that's where the question does come in about protecting our sources. And that's something that always has to be foremost on the mind of any journalist. Okay, any other questions?
Yeah, can we got one in the back here?
Hi, I have a question. Is this on?
Here.
Okay, thank you for coming. My question, based on your experience in North Korea, is what are some of the most common misperceptions or mischaracterizations you see about North Korea from US or other based media?
Yeah, I think the most common perception is that the North Koreans are robotic. And I always tell the North Koreans they are entirely to blame for that. Because they love to show us the military parades where it's really hard to do stuff, but they're really good at it. Or the mass games where they're performing in complete synchronicity. To them, that projects unity. To us, it just looks robotic. And so I always tell them, you gotta stop. You just gotta let us see how you are day to day. Is that we need to see the human side of North Koreans. They are not robotic. So when you're in North Korea for a big event, there will be an announcement that says, okay, the recording begins, and everybody will sit up. But 2 seconds before that, they are taking a nap. They are just like completely stuck, slouched. They're just normal people. So for me, it was always great to see what I call before and after the performance, before and after the theater, those moments where they're finally letting loose. And so that robotic, the mask, the performance, that's what it is. And they know how to do that for the cameras. They know how to put the mask on to protect themselves as well in almost any circumstance. I will sometimes have Western diplomats make a trip to North Korea, and I had one Australian diplomat come say to me, their faces were just blank. There was nothing there. And I was like, listen, that is a mask that they put on, because the North Koreans are actually the sassiest people I've ever met. They are the funniest people, super affectionate, super opinionated, just won't say anything about Kim Jong-un, but about everything else. I mean, they harassed me talking about this earlier with you guys about my love life, constantly, just everything. So they're not shy. But I think that that's one of the people sometimes when they see my pictures are surprised that they're smiling. And I'm like, I'm sorry, but situation is anywhere. I think we all try to find a little joy in our situation, and they don't really know any better. And so I think that that's one of the things that I do want to convey is that as difficult as their situations are, and they're very difficult, that they do have a sense of humor, that they are humans, that they're real people. I think this is important because the country is so isolated. We have no access to them. And it can seem like a country that almost is a figment of our imaginations. So in episode 1 of my podcast, doing some shameless promotion of the podcast, but we talk about the interview, the movie, The Interview. I don't know if you guys have seen it, but it's with Seth Rogen and James Franco. And remember when that came out, I thought, oh my gosh, they just don't even think that this is a real country. Like there are almost no movies that portray the assassination of a sitting leader, right? Give it a name call it, give it a name of a country that sounds like North Korea, but doesn't actually refer to North Korea. We all know who it is. But to me, that was an indication that it's not like a real country to them. And so I think that that's dangerous, that if we continue to think of it as this far off country that doesn't matter, because especially for the South Koreans, it does matter. Their future is bound. They're bound to North Korea inextricably. And that means we are bound to North Korea inextricably. The region, and as their capability grows, they're just gonna have a bigger part of the world under that nuclear threat.
Another question back here. Thank you.
What is North Korea and Kim Jong-un's goal with accumulating so many nuclear weapons? Like, what is the country and the leader trying to accomplish?
Yeah, I mean, that's the big question. I do think that Kim Jong-un wants to use the nuclear weapons to cement his legacy, his leadership. He's got a rule for, if everything goes well for him, it's going to be decades. And that gives him a certain measure of strength at home to have built these, to show his people he can protect them. But I do think he's thinking ahead of the nuclear weapons as a way to negotiate. And so I do think he's thinking that my arsenal needs to be big enough that it'll serve as a payoff down the road. And I think he's hoping to get that payoff from President Trump. And honestly, he might still think he's going to get the payoff from President Trump if President Trump is reelected. So there was some news recently that President Trump revealed, Maggie Haberman, in her book, she revealed that President Trump said that they're still in contact. So I think the nuclear weapons for him mean two things. It is that to his people, it's a way to show that he can defend them, and then it's also going to serve as a payoff, a financial, diplomatic, political payoff internationally. I hope it's not to destroy the world, because they would be destroyed as well.
Hi.
You mentioned that previously, obviously, no one's been inside the country in 2 years, and so, but that we have images of like a cargo train and of certain things. Can you just speak a little bit more about that? Is it like a GIS similar satellite? Is it an international satellite? Does America own the satellite that's taking the photos? And like, who's analyzing the images that they're seeing?
Yes, so when I teach classes on North Korea, I do talk about what we can see from above. Because while we're not there on the ground, there's a lot we can see from above. I should note that the North Koreans realize this, so they often do some staging to make it seem like they're engaged in nuclear activity. So they're very aware of the satellites, but they're private. They're certainly privately owned companies, satellite companies, as well as the government has very, very powerful satellite technology that we don't have, that I don't have access to, but we don't have access to.
The American government, or do you? Is it?
Yes.
Okay.
And I don't know the extent of how many other governments are keeping a close eye, but I would imagine that the South Koreans are keeping a close eye as well, perhaps Japan. But yeah, I'm not an expert in the satellite technology, but I do think that there are websites, there's 38 North and CSIS invest quite a bit in making sure that that satellite research is shared in their reporting on.
Over here.
Thank you. Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Fascinating remarks so far. I'm going to ask like a kind of mundane, stupid question, which is you talked about the North Korean diet. I'm fascinated by like, what is the North Korean diet? How does it differ from the South Korean diet? What's the breakdown between Pyongyang and the sort of countryside, and how does it all work?
I love that you're asking. Normally it's a South Korean. The first question I'll ask is about the food. So what did you eat while you were there? Because but I think that's a really interesting question. And I think that for North Korea, it's an issue of food security. So I try not to talk about food in North Korea in terms of cuisine, although they do have their own cuisine, because I'm much more obsessed with how food insecurity has affected what they eat now they develop. I will say that we have a lot of great North Korean style restaurants in South Korea. A lot of people from North Korea, including some members of my family, evacuated and ended up in the South and brought their food with them. But that food doesn't exist in North Korea, really. So when you go to a North Korean restaurant in South Korea, apart from a few that are run by defectors, it's really more like a memory of what the food was like. Because the peninsula was divided at the 38th parallel between North and South. Honestly, if you knew Korea, you would divide it between East and West. Because by cutting it off in the middle, the breadbasket is in the south. The North is completely mountainous and very difficult to grow any food. Harsh climate. And so they already shafted, in 1945 when they divided the country at the 38th parallel. And so it wasn't great to start out with. So when I go to North Korea, when I've been to North Korea, what I eat there is entirely different from what I eat in South Korea. And so what people eat is shaped by what they have or what they don't have. So often tourists or journalists will come back. I remember one of my colleagues wrote a story about how she gained weight in North Korea. They want us to put out stories like that. They want us to put out stories that say that the food is amazing and there's plenty to eat. Yeah, for us there is, because they're trying to impress us. And I think that food is also political capital. So for those who are politically powerful, they have access to food. So people in Pyongyang. But the rest of the population, very little access to the kind of food that you need for your brain and your body to grow properly. So when you do go to the countryside, you see a lot of, so I did post a couple images today on my Instagram feed, and if you look closely at their face, they're not fat, they're not getting sugar, it's a lot of carbs and that's it. They're not getting fresh fruit, vegetables, protein. Some North Koreans have told me that maybe they got some part, they won't be protein. Their protein will be tofu based. That said, I will admit that when you do have access to food, it's very good because Korean food is good. But it will be very different. So for example, one interesting thing is that during the famine of the 1990s, the United States started sending, NGOs started bringing in humanitarian. And the thing that the Americans brought in was maize, which is something that's very common in the United States, right? It travels well, really hardy, cornmeal. And so I was really shocked when I went to a book fair in North Korea, and there was like 365 ways to make corn dishes. That's what they have. And so they've created a whole cuisine around cornmeal. And it's funny, my parents are dual South Korean US citizens. They live in South Korea now. My dad watches this show with North Korean defectors, and they had a snack time episode. And they were sharing what their favorite snacks were. And there's one that's called gangmin, which South Koreans would not know, really. I don't think it's not a dish that they have. It's corn noodles. And I still remember watching it with my dad. He just started drooling. He's like, I really want to try that. So I brought back some corn noodles from North Korea. But this is the thing that defectors miss the most is corn noodles. So they have their own cuisine built around what it is they have access to. I would say they also eat a lot of injogogi, which is imitation meat, which is essentially tofu. Yeah, so the snacks that they eat are entirely different than what we eat in South Korea. And I think it is very fascinating. It's really about food security.
I think we have time for one more question right here.
If you speak up, I can probably hear you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so thank you so much for your wonderful presentation. It's very interesting. I just wanted to ask a question in regards to you are saying that one of the goals for the development of nuclear weapons for the North Korean regime is to be able to bring that to the table of negotiations with them in the future. And so my question was, what is it they want out of those negotiations? Is it in relation to maybe the sanctions, the economic sanctions that have been imposed on North Korea? And if that's the case, are those sanctions effective in the way in which they're in application currently, in your opinion?
These are great questions, and this is like a whole other discussion that we could focus on. I don't think that North Korea's Kim Jong-un will ever give up his nuclear weapons completely. They are so important to his legacy and so important to his strategy. But there's a lot more in his arsenal that I do think he's willing to give up for the right price. Now, in terms of, and so I think that becomes the challenge for nuclear negotiators. What happened in Hanoi in the negotiations with the United States is that if we demand complete denuclearization, I just don't think Kim Jong-un is going to agree to it. And so I'm not saying that you have to do anything less than that. I think that we should always be aiming for, that should always be our goal, complete denuclearization. It's just a matter of sequencing and where in the process and I think that's what the North Koreans want. They want to build out a long process where they can hold on to their nuclear weapons, but negotiate pieces of that program away in exchange for concessions. That I think is a realistic way of looking at it. It's complicated because I think there's a huge danger to acknowledging North Korea as a nuclear power. That's what North Korea wants. Going back to your question about what do they want, they do want to be acknowledged as a nuclear power because then if they join that club, they don't ever have to give up their nuclear weapons. And so that's one of the goals as well. Hugely dangerous because it also sets an example for other small countries looking for a strategy, right? I think the danger also of this program developing is that you start an arms race in Northeast Asia. So if they're able to continue building their weapons, the other countries, South Korea, Japan, might say that they need to defend themselves as well. So these are some of the consequences of letting this program grow out of control. Now, in terms of sanctions, this is a huge debate in my community. Do sanctions work? What is the impact of sanctions? I think an important way to look at sanctions also is as a potential diplomatic tool. Now, while North Korea and Kim Jong-un, he is building up this arsenal with all these tests that he's been carrying out, that when you come to that negotiating table, you have something to negotiate with. And so the fact is, though, yes, sanctions have adverse impact on North Koreans. But I'm not sure that that's the fault of the UN. That's the fault of the regime that is making the decision to prioritize weapons over their people. But Kim Jong-un is looking at the long game. In his head, he's got his priorities. He's like, this will pay off for me in the long run. Yes, there's going to be pain in the short run. It's going to pay off in the long run. That's what he believes. So for sanctions, I think that UN sanctions are only good if they're enforced by member countries. And that's something that's very difficult to track and very difficult to convince some countries to stick to. There are some countries, China doesn't want to see North Korea collapse. And so I think that it was landmark when the Chinese did agree to very, very tough UN sanctions after North Korea's last nuclear test. But I think it would be very hard to get them on board with more sanctions unless there's another nuclear test. And in the meantime, there are some reports of ship-to-ship transfers offshore. So possibly some countries try to get the goods that North Korea needs to evade sanctions. But again, I think cyber is the one we should be looking at. Cyber is kind of the hidden, you guys are the ones who have to deal with this because people like me are too old to figure it out. But it really is like that's where cyber is where they're making their money. And the latest, so there is a panel of experts at the UN that really investigates sanctions invasion by North Korea. And the draft report, so we haven't seen the final report, the draft report, according to news agencies, is very focused on how cyber has been funding the nuclear program. So perfect timing for my podcast, because this is what we're looking at. And this is what I constantly try to tell people is, you've got to look at the cyber. You've got to figure out how to stop cyber if you want to stop the flow of money into the nuclear.
Thank you so much. Thank you. This has been phenomenally interesting. I know we've all learned a lot. Please join me in thanking Julie for joining us today.
So I would just say that I'm starting the research for season 2 of my podcast. Do give it a listen if you get a chance. It is, I promise it's fun to listen to. It's not heavy-handed.
It's great. Absolutely. Please go listen.
But I want some feedback. So if you do listen to it, please reach out to me. It's easy to find me. I want your thoughts on where we should go next with season 2. We're going to go to different parts of the world, explore different North Korean relationships in Africa and in the Middle East. But I love your feedback as well. So find me on Instagram or LinkedIn or wherever on my website and let me know what you think. Thanks, guys.
Good job.